He had earned the nickname Skullcracker because he pistol-whipped his victims.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're looking at the 10 scariest and most notorious prison breaks from British prisons.
How on earth can somebody saw through bars, if this is correct, with a diamond cutter without staff hearing that?
Daniel Khaif.
Daniel Khaif is still on the run after clinging to the underside of a food delivery van.
In 2023, 21-year-old offender Daniel Khaif, who had been charged with spying for Iran and being part of a bomb hoax, managed to escape from HMP Wandsworth. He did it by climbing underneath a vehicle and ended up on the run for 3 days until he was rearrested while cycling.
But the jail is now at the centre of a growing storm with serious questions about how a terror suspect managed to escape.
He was then taken to Belmarsh instead, having now been charged with escaping prison, while an investigation was opened into the conditions at Wandsworth that led to the escape being possible.
In December last year, only 7 members of staff turned up for a night shift to look after 1,500 inmates.
It turned out that as many as 80 members of staff were off the day Khaif escaped, leaving the prison unsecure, since that was nearly a third of the total number of officers there. Ronnie Biggs. The Great Train Robbery of 1963 remains one of the most famous crimes in British history, but the notoriety of its criminals didn't end when they were caught 3 weeks later.
Biggs's role in all this was to provide the driver to move the train that the gang had stopped down there to this point here.
Ronnie Biggs ended up escaping from prison in 1965, climbing over a wall of Wandsworth with a rope. He briefly lived in Paris, then Australia, and finally Brazil, while on the run from the fuzz.
He ended up in Brazil, but his £150,000 cut from the robbery soon ran out, so he turned himself into a celebrity criminal.
Though the authorities knew where he was, the Brazilian government refused to allow him to be extradited back to Blighty. Bizarrely, in 2001, he was willingly flown back to the UK by the Sun to serve out his sentence.
The singing scoundrel, Ronnie Biggs, rocking it in Rio in his years as Britain's most notorious fugitive.
He was released from prison on compassionate grounds in 2009 and passed away in 2013. Here's Macaulay and Nessan Quinlivan. This shocking escape happened in 1991 when 2 IRA members violently broke out of Brixton Prison.
It's alleged Staffordshire Special Branch planted a prison officer acting as an agent and informer in Brixton.
Quinlivan and Macaulay fought their way out of custody when Macaulay pulled a gun on one of the guards who was taking them back from church.
He was encouraged to offer Macaulay and Quinlivan an escape plan.
Like Ronnie Biggs, they also successfully scaled a wall and then stole a car, injuring another guard in the process. Both of them managed to get to Ireland, though they also ended up back in prison.
5 months later, Macaulay and Quinlivan were on the run, following an escape which mirrored the bungled Special Branch plan.
Quinlivan was sent to Portlaoise Prison for firearms charges, while Macaulay was sent down in Dublin for murder and armed robbery. The British government never successfully extradited them from the Republic of Ireland. Parkhurst Breakout.
Parkhurst at the time was a Category A prison, which held some of the biggest mass murderers.
Sometimes dubbed Britain's Alcatraz because of its somewhat isolated location on the Isle of Wight, HMP Parkhurst saw 3 prisoners escape in 1995.
To break out of Parkhurst, you need a lot of planning, you need a lot of resources, and you need a lot of luck.
They had a seemingly solid plan: cut through the wire fence, go to ground, and then steal a plane, since one of the escapees happened to be a pilot.
4 prisoners start a fight. And as the guards are distracted, Williams, Rose and Rogers duck out of sight.
Only they weren't able to find a plane in the end and were stuck living in a garden shed for a few days until they were eventually caught. As with many prison escapes, endless mistakes on the part of the prison led to the escape being possible. Untrained staff, minimal CCTV and no alarms on the fence. John Kendall and Sidney Draper. Moving now to HMP Gartree in Leicestershire, where in 1987 2 prisoners managed to escape from the prison yard in a helicopter.
On Thursday, December the 10th, a helicopter was forced to land inside the walls of Gartree Maximum Security Prison in Leicestershire.
One, a mobster, and the other, a murderer. They quickly separated and went into hiding, though Kendall was caught not even 2 weeks later. The public was shocked at the sheer audacity of them hijacking a helicopter, and Gartree security was quickly tightened.
During the same flight, the men asked to be flown over a location which took them past the prison.
Despite the whole thing being filmed and many public appeals launching, it took 13 months for Draper to be taken back into custody.
Just after 3, Downs produced a gun and told Ian Evans to fly to the prison.
Though there have been many helicopter prison escapes around the world, this is the only one to have happened in the UK. Michael Skullcracker Wheatley. He'd been originally sent down for multiple armed robberies in 2002, all set to serve over a dozen life sentences. But in 2014, Wheatley managed to escape while on day release.
Michael Wheatley was given 13 life sentences in 2002 for a string of brutal raids on banks and building societies across the south of England.
He simply didn't come back to HMP Stanford Hill after he'd been let out. Despite having quite the head start, he was eventually rearrested 4 days later.
The robber had a handgun and threatened staff before escaping with the cash.
He was caught because he decided to commit another armed robbery in Surrey.
But at this building society at Sunbury-on-Thames, they already had a strong suspicion of who was involved.
It's frightening to think that extremely dangerous offenders were allowed into open prisons like Stanford Hill in the first place, free to leave and commit more violent crimes. George Blake. In 1961, MI6 agent George Blake was unmasked as a double agent who had been feeding information and state secrets to the Soviet Union for roughly a decade.
Blake managed to scale these walls with the help of 3 former inmates who threw him a rope from out here.
He was locked up in Wormwood Scrubs in London, but in 1966 staged a breakout with the help of sympathetic former prisoners. The entire plan consisted of Blake breaking a window, climbing out of the building, and then getting over the prison walls with a rope ladder to meet his getaway driver.
In Russia, George Blake is seen as a hero after passing information that unmasked hundreds of covert British agents in Eastern Europe.
He reached Europe and was then driven to Germany. He lived the rest of his life in Eastern Europe, dying in Moscow in 2020 and never going back to prison.
Blake never regarded himself as a traitor, claiming he never felt British. He was born in Holland and acquired citizenship through his father,
Matthew Baker and James Whitlock. This pair of cellmates escaped from Pentonville in 2016 after somehow getting their hands on industrial equipment that was able to cut through the bars.
How on earth can somebody saw through bars, if this is correct, with a diamond cutter without staff hearing that?
Like many other escapees, they also climbed over the wall and made a break for it, and horrifyingly, prison guards didn't even notice they were gone for 12 hours.
On the run after one of the most audacious prison breaks in recent years, the cellmates reportedly cut through window bars, then used bed sheets to scale the perimeter wall.
Baker was caught first, while Whitlock remained at large for a few weeks longer, though both were ultimately recaptured. There were a few more arrests too, of people suspected to have helped them while they were free.
Well, the feeling is they really must have had some sort of help from the outside, perhaps the use of a drone to drop off equipment to help them with the escape.
John Massie. In 1975, John Massie murdered pub doorman Charlie Higgins and was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
We went on a bit of a pub crawl.
Okay.
Yeah. And we ended up at this late night venue.
However, he spent more than double that behind bars because of his 3 successful escape attempts.
I probably started it off because the guy was wagging his finger and I think I just slung me drink over.
During the first of those attempts, he was actually at large in Spain for 3 years. And just like Baker and Whitlock, in Massie's last escape in 2012, he climbed over the wall of Pentonville.
Pressed the gun up to his chest, said get back inside.
Massie was ultimately released in 2018 and hasn't reoffended. But what's scary in this case isn't Massie himself, but that yet again, people escaped from secure prisons, apparently with relative ease.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
The Maze Breakout.
And what I wanted to do was to not be released, but to escape. You know, it's great to be released, but I wanted to break the system.
This notorious prison housed IRA prisoners for years, but in 1983, it was the site of the biggest prison breakout in British history. Widely believed to be one of the most secure prisons anywhere in Europe, this was proven catastrophically untrue when 38 men hijacked a lorry and fled.
You just can't willy-nilly get up and start cutting holes in fences, otherwise the security apparatus is on top of you morning, noon and night.
Though about half of them were very quickly caught, a years-long manhunt ensued to try and round up the rest of them, with some getting all the way to America.
The initial focus was not the prison or its structure. The first walls to scale were in the prison officers' minds.
Following the peace agreements in the late 90s, many of the prisoners who were still on the loose were given amnesties and were never brought back into custody. Let us know in the comments which of these manhunts you remember.
I think it's a simple case of underfunding, and all of these problems are entirely predictable.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojoUK and subscribe for more great content.